For far too long, the effective management of the customer's experience has been considered a soft skill. But today, successful companies recognize that the customer experience is king, or from my perspective, is queen. Welcome to CX Unplugged. I'm Gabrielle Gonzalez, your host, and in this series, you will hear from me and other industry experts about how prioritizing the customer experience led to amazing outcomes. Brought to you by the Multifamily Media Network.
Hello and welcome to this episode of CX Unplugged by the Multifamily Media Network. I would love to welcome today's guest, Shanenn Bryant, who not only brings an expansive history in the multifamily world, most recently as a director of training and development, but also as a pattern transformation expert and coach on her podcast, Top Self. So Shanenn, thank you so much for taking your time and joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel like we go way back in this industry of multifamily, so it's good to be here with you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's interesting. I think actually where you've been for the last 19 years, I don't know if I should say that publicly. I feel like it ages us both, but that's where I first started in my property management career too. So we both got a lot of shared experiences there.
For sure. That's one thing about multifamily. We know it's small, right? Everybody knows everybody.
Isn't that, it really is crazy. I think there's, they started off with that Kevin Bacon 6 degrees of separation.
Oh, right.
But I think there's like a whole thing in multifamily that could actually be coined maybe 5 degrees of separation
Right.
or 4 even.
Yeah.
Maybe that's something for us to look into soon. I'll maybe take a note of that over here. So I wanted to start off by just revisiting sort of the way that I really define the customer. On CX Unplugged, we talk about all things customer experience. But when I first kind of started in this journey, one of the things that I wanted to do was to redefine who the customer is and highlight that the customer isn't really just the end user. The customer is really anyone who you encounter, right, as a representative of your company. So in that regard, the customer could really be your colleague, your coworker. It could be the stakeholder in one of your assets. It could be one of your service providers, like a painter or a cleaner, a contractor. It could be any number of people. It could be the crew that comes and delivers your waters in your office every week or month. It could be the postman or postwoman. So I just really like to put that out there. And if you really think about customer in that context, I think it opens up a lot of new ways of thinking about strategies and how we can execute in a way that really elevates that customer experience across that whole spectrum. So
yeah,
thanks
absolutely.
for being willing to engage on that today with me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's good to go back and really redefine what the customer is, because a lot of times we do think, oh, it's just who we are, showing property to, who our residents are. And it can be so much wider than that, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So I thought just with you've got a really broad and unique background that I thought could add some great content for our viewers and listeners in that space. You talk a lot about leadership. You're somewhat of a leadership expert and coach too. And so I thought a good way of looking at this, or maybe kicking off a conversation, would be, to ask what your opinion is. So if you're visiting any of your portfolio or assets and your customer service scores are down or struggling, in your opinion, where should leadership start first to help to improve that strategy?
Yeah, well, I definitely want to say I have a little bit of a different approach when I talk about leadership. So I'm not necessarily always talking about the tactical leadership skills. I think there are many more talented people that know, oh, these are the exact skills that we need. However, I do talk a lot about belief in yourself, setting boundaries for yourself. Um, how do we bounce back in situations? And I think certainly customer service is one of these areas where we really have to focus on some of those types of things versus just the quote unquote normal tactical leadership skills. So in this case, if we talk about like what is the number one place to start when it comes to strategy for this, oftentimes we always go straight to policy, or that's where we kind of want to go, where we talk about policy and you have to stand and you have to greet the customer and make sure that there's water available and cookies, and all of that stuff is fantastic. However, it really probably should start with some procedures first. So, what are the procedures that we have in place that are supporting the teams that are handling the customer, that are dealing with each other on a day to day basis? You brought up it could be your coworker in the same office that you're in with every single day. And so, how do we manage those things? If we feel like I'm unsupported in my role, I'm overwhelmed, I'm burnt out, there's no policy in the world or amount of policies that's going to make me handle that customer interaction any better. So we have to
True.
more, yes. And so
Excellent point. Yeah.
we focus so much on stress management. And really, I think there's this idea of stress recovery. So, stress recovery after we have had that interaction. So, yes, we need to keep all of the training the great customer service training that we have, and how do we handle difficult customers, and how do we manage our stress long term. But what about after that interaction? And I think that's where we have some improvement that we can make. And so if we don't have this environment where our teams feel like, hey, that was just a pretty tough interaction that I just had with a customer, be it a resident, a vendor, a coworker, if we are not leading from a place of, hey, it's not only okay that you go take 5 minutes to yourself and regroup, but it is expected. Like that is the procedure that we do. Breathing, do we teach them breathing techniques to really bring down the nervous system? All of those things are what should fall in this stress recovery. And that to me is like strategy number one.
You just blew my mind. I mean, it's one question. We're one question in here. And I'm
Yeah.
like, you know, that resonated with me so much. And I actually kind of have goosebumps. I'm like, that is so, you are spot on. Yet I, I don't know that I've ever really heard anyone articulate it that way and identify the need for that stress recovery, like procedurally, right? Like this is something that you're going to need. You may not, some people may not even realize that they need that, but
Yeah.
it's that rock in the pocket that's weighing them down next time, right? That maybe they're not going to be able to handle the next one as effectively, or the next encounter as effectively. Everything is weighing them down because they aren't taking time to really recover from that last stressful interaction.
Right. And how are we even managing the other team members or our other interactions with employees? And we know, I mean, life is so fast paced on properties in particular. And if I've just had that interaction with a resident, let's say, I think that's a bigger, one of the bigger buckets. If I've just had that interaction and I don't feel like, and there's no procedure in place, I don't have the training, the resources to say, hey, this is not only something I need, but this is what I'm supposed to do. This is what is expected. Then we really can damage some of the other interactions that we have. And so then now this just becomes a trickle effect. So we might give, oh, okay, I'll do this because I don't want that interaction again with this resident. So I'm going to say yes to things that maybe I shouldn't because I don't want to go through that experience again. I don't want to feel that nervousness. And then, of course, we can take that stuff home with us. So if we don't have this stress recovery plan in place, um, not only are we going to damage potential other interactions, but also, like, how do we then come back from that and go, what can I do differently in another situation?
Yeah. Great point. I mean, that's really, really a great point. And to have that, the question, right, started with leadership, right? So you bring up such a good point that it's really got to be a leadership driven, it's got to be a culture, rather, really. It has to be a culture of understanding that these things are going to happen. We are going to have very high stress conversations or confrontations or situations, circumstances that could come barrel at you, one, two, three, just like that,
Yeah.
And so this is just to be expected. So, what are we doing as a culture, as a company, um, just as a culture, really, to support you in that so that you have the tools, the understanding, and the emotional and mental capacity to forge, continue moving forward, right? And people, because then if they don't recover, and like what you're saying, and then they do engage in the next interaction or the next interaction, they're like at capacity,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
then they're not doing as well as maybe they know that they're capable of doing because they've reached their capacity, and then that also compounds and is making people feel less motivated, less happy, maybe more anxiety about going back to work and engaging in this sort of thing again.
Well, think about, the last time you had this, what felt like a very unhealthy or charged interaction with someone, be it a customer or in your personal life. There are many things that happen within your body that we know of that can alter what that response should be. So whether you're looking at it from employee to employee, or as you said, in your organization, the reason that this is so important and to teach people that these are the things that happen and this is how we manage through them. Because if I'm regulated like that, and this is a high energy conversation and it's a very stressful conversation, we know 100% when our breathing gets shallow in that way, our brain does not function the same. We don't come up with the same solutions that we would when we are in calmer head. So, from an organization or leadership standpoint, you may have employees that are making these kind of firing off these decisions, but not because they're not trained or they're not thinking through or they're not trying to protect the company, but just the simple fact that they're so elevated and their nervous system is so charged, they literally can't think straight.
I love it. I love it. So, one of the things I know you talk about a lot too in your podcast are boundaries and how boundaries are, very important in general and in
Yeah.
general. So how do you think boundaries play a role in the customer service, customer experience world?
Yeah. Well, boundaries get a bad rap, I feel like, whether it's in your personal relationships or your workplace relationships. And part of the reason they get such a bad rap is because we're really bad at setting them. So when someone else sets a boundary with us, it doesn't feel good. You're like, oh, whether what they said no, or they're giving some pushback. So just in general, we don't do well with receiving boundaries because we don't do well with setting them ourselves. But I think in particular, especially for some of us old school, where we came from this mindset of customer service, like great customer service means saying yes, right? Like saying yes to everything and what can we do and over pleasing and over delivering. Um, but we have to kind of think that, kind of going back to what we're talking about, your resident experience is your employee experience. So, how are your employees experiencing their day, their workload? What boundaries are we emailing them at 10 p.m. and we're stressing them and we're not giving them that downtime to even get re regulated, to get in a good space and the things that they need to do? So, if we're not modeling those healthy boundaries in general, they're not going to show up when your customer comes in because we're kind of going to be coming from that burnt out place that we kind of live in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about boundaries. Just the other day, I went to a Ishtak Perlman. I went and saw Ishtak Perlman, the famous prolific violinist, and it was. I mean, he was fabulous. But well, not but I was with my mom and a few friends, and it was just everyone was so still and quiet, in there while he was playing. And I leaned over a couple of times and I just like leaned over and whispered in my mom's ear about, we were just, kind of going back and forth a little bit, not a whole lot, but a little bit. And we weren't being noisy, like I wasn't whispering loudly. But the woman behind us leaned up and said, "Every time you do that, I can't see him." And my initial reaction was like, oh my gosh, that was so rude of her to say that. But then I quickly thought, was it really rude of her or was I being rude, right? Like behaving like that, not considering the fact that that may be distracting to her. And do I really need to be doing that in this environment? And maybe she was just setting boundaries, right? She's just letting me know. She wasn't rude about it.
Right.
She wasn't rude about it. She just politely said, let us know this is interfering with my enjoyment of this performance. And I've really thought quite a bit about that ever since and thought, geez, I could have gotten really belligerent or upset or snarly or something. But I really chose not to because I thought I have no right to react that way. And I have no reason, there's no other benefit that's going to come to me from reacting that way. This is a woman. I respect her position. I was interfering with her enjoyment. That's my fault. I didn't know. She let me know. And now I'm not going to do it anymore. And it's no skin off my back either. So everybody's happy. It's fine.
I think that what a great example. And I think if we could take like feedback and boundaries, those two are just such taboo topics because we always make them mean something about us. Like, oh, I did something wrong. Oh, this doesn't feel good. Oh, they don't feel the same way as me. They don't like me the same. So there's so many things that can come up when we talk about boundaries and feedback. But if we can get to a place where we are really setting healthy boundaries with our customers, with each other, with leadership, and how, leading in all different directions, then we've really got a healthy environment.
Yeah, I'm curious, over the years, in your experience, have you seen more environments where it is healthy and there is that healthy kind of give and take going on, or more environments, do you think, where there's some work to be done maybe in that space? Because even within even one company, you can have a variety of microcultures, right? So,
Yeah.
but
Like you said, even being with one company, if you're someone who is with one company, chances are you've maybe had different supervisors within your time frame of that company, or you've worked for different companies. And so you'll see this across the board. And it really 100% goes back to the leadership that you have. So are they setting that? Is it okay to say, hey, can we do this at a different time because of this? Because whatever those are. I know, a previous company that I worked at, we went through this phase where the email was shut off at a certain time. Like those emails weren't going through. And that didn't necessarily stay in place 100%. But I think what it did do is make people more aware, like, we can schedule those emails because that's always the thing. Well, I want to get this off my plate to somebody else. Just schedule the delivery of them so you can still uphold some boundaries and some, workplace boundaries even within that and still get your things done and get it off your plate. while holding that up. So there are a lot of different ways that we can do it. So, to go back to your question, yeah, I think again, it goes back to leadership. Like who is modeling that behavior or not?
Yeah, and gosh, just in reflecting back on that, I can see, in my own history, I can see where I definitely was, I've experienced getting, that bombardment in the middle of the night or, whatever.
Yeah.
And I've also think I've done that. And it's like, oh, lessons learned.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've all been on probably both sides of it for sure. It's
Yeah.
just one of those things, like, we've got to talk about it more. We have to, again, like, what is the procedure? Do you have a procedure in place when it comes to these topics, boundaries?
Yeah. I love it. I love it. So, in that space, what would you say is the most underrated skill in a service culture from a leadership perspective, or what should leadership be considering more?
Hmm. Kind of underrated skill?
Yeah, in customer service that leadership really should be more open to or looking for. Kind of, I think going back to what you said originally, you said that um, there's processes, right, or policies, and
Yeah.
there's also procedures. So, and I think people talk a lot of times about, these are the skills you need to have for this particular job, and maybe they're very tactical skills. But
Yeah.
I've argued forever too that really the heart, right, especially in the customer space, the heart matters, the intention matters a lot. And people, I think all people are wired good to begin with, right? But through life and circumstances and things,
Right.
we all kind of, may
Yeah.
lean one way or, the other, or struggle at times. But I think the heart is really important in customer experience. Somebody who really wants to please somebody else. So
Yeah.
that's just one space. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we were talking about it being viewed as saying yes to everything. I think there's this huge fear that everybody has though of, like, I have this fear that I have to prove myself in some way. And I think, like, oh, I always have to do it perfect. I always have to do it right. And I think one of the skills that we don't teach is we don't have to do it perfect, but what we do have to do is learn from it. Like, what can you take from an experience that didn't go well? There are there are always lessons that we can learn, and just knowing conversations that I've had in the past or overhearing conversations, we know that if there was a bad customer interaction, we're telling people about it, whether, we're telling our supervisor, hey, this thing happened. It didn't go well. The resident was super upset or the customer was really upset. And we talk about those things. And then we go right into the task at hand of, well, what are we going to give this person as a concession for this? Or how are we going to respond to it? But what we don't talk about is, can we also go through what we learned from this? So, what did you do well? And I think that's really important. I think there are three things. What went well, what didn't go well, and what can I do differently next time? So if we say what went well, that even gives, if I'm the supervisor, that gives me something when I'm calling this customer back to at least, like, kind of grab onto, that I understand this happened and I'm glad that you guys came into agreement about this, or I'm glad that that went well. Let's talk about what didn't. So you can even do that with a customer. But with that employee who had that interaction, okay, well, now what didn't go well? What are things that you wish that you would have said or done or could have done differently? And how are we going to do that better next time? Is it that you weren't recovered from the last interaction? So kind of going back to that stress recovery, are we not taking care of ourselves? Is there something happening on the property? Those are things that we just don't go into. We go straight to the task of, okay, what do we need to tell this person? How do we need to fix it? And then we move on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really good point. It's interesting. In one of my segments that I talk about how to, manage customer complaints effectively. The last step in that is always follow up. Right. And I've had some pushback on that from people saying, I don't want to open up a can of worms, like we got it resolved in the moment. We've moved on down the road and that's it. Let's leave it there. And I really argue against that point, that notion, because I think that's so often that's where we leave things unfinished. Maybe it resolved, maybe the conversation ended and you got them to agree or acquiesce in the moment, right? But then everybody has reflection on these things. And so to follow up with somebody, a week later, 30 days later, whatever is, appropriate for the circumstances, and reopen that proverbial can of worms, if you will, and ensure that we are still on the right track here. I know we did resolve that. Hopefully, are we still on the right track? That I have found that in my experience to be so transformative in terms of building and sustaining those relationships long term.
Gabrielle, that's so good and I'm glad that you're pushing that, because if you think of your interaction, especially if it got heated or it was a little bit elevated, what happens 3 hours later or the next day? You're like, oh, and I didn't even bring up that, or I should have said that, or this is still bothering me. And our customer most likely will experience that too. Like, oh, we got so on a tangent about this one thing that I completely forgot to mention that my dishwasher has been broken for 3 months, or that, this other thing happened. So I love that you're pushing that follow up, because then that gives an opportunity, because if we still leave it that it feels undone or not complete, do we have a happy customer or no? Yeah. So I love that.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you. I do. I think that's really, really important. It kind of reminds me. You ever watch Seinfeld?
Yes. Reruns all the time, right? That Golden Girls and Raymond, I can't get enough.
I know
Yeah.
we might both be aging ourselves here, but
Yeah.
For those of you who are familiar with it, it reminds me of the George episode where he was eating shrimp in a meeting, and he said the ocean called and they want their shrimp back or something, and George left and then came up with this really good comeback he wanted
Right.
to say, and he just was trying so hard to get back to the boardroom so he could say his comeback.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
obsessed on it. But I think that's like you said, that people do that, and you got to give them, to really get back to baseline. I think you do have to give people an opportunity to say their heart, to communicate.
Yeah. To feel like, okay, yes, I do feel like I got all of my grievances out. And there may be something that you forgot to mention too that might help the situation. So I think it's great.
Yeah, great. Well, so I know I've taken up some of your time today, and I so appreciate you joining us today. But I'm wondering, is there one thing, if you could say from your broad perspective, because you've got a really unique and cool perspective in terms of having worked, in multifamily for so long, but
Yeah, watch
also
it, Gabrielle. Watch it.
I know,
On the time. No.
I know. I can say that because I've been there
I know.
too, maybe even a little longer. But along with your other passion in coaching and kind of being that pattern transformation expert, what would you say of our listeners, like one great takeaway for them in terms of what's important from that, your wealth of knowledge in driving exceptional customer experience?
Yeah. Well, I always say we have to start with self. So I think self-awareness is the biggest thing. What are the things that and most of us now have had enough interactions or enough of these interactions, unfortunately. If we can look back or even as they happen going forward to go, what was it about that conversation that really triggered me? Like, when did it go from a fine conversation to then, a level 5 or 10? So what was it that the customer said or did? Because a lot of times we are responding from our own place, our own perceptions of ourselves, our own stories that we tell ourselves. And that customer may have just hit on that. So I think it's so good to go, even though it doesn't sound like it, even though they're talking about the dishwasher and how you haven't followed up and you don't communicate well, that's probably hitting you a little bit different internally. And so again, they may be just saying the words you didn't communicate, but if you've got this internal dialogue that's negative that you're going to and making that mean something more, that's really where to get in tune with. So why is this triggering for me? And so I think the best way is just going back. And if you can remember the situations, great. And if not, just start moving forward when you feel a little bit heated, whether it's your coworker, whether it's a customer, whether it's in your personal relationship. Like, what's triggering me? What's there that I need to maybe look at a little bit? So I'd say that's the first place to start.
Great advice. Thank you. Great advice. Well, I know that you are also, I don't know if we can announce that here, but I think you have another special, interesting endeavor coming up soon.
I do. And thank you for letting me share it. So I have joined the Multifamily Media Network as well. I'll have a podcast that is launching called Lead Without Limits. So if you connect with me on LinkedIn, Shanenn Bryant, and my first name is spelled kind of funny. It's got an E in it. So Shane and then 2 N's, Bryant. But if you connect with me on LinkedIn, you'll see all of the promotions and all of the hype when we launch that podcast. But if this type of conversation resonated with you, you're going to love that podcast as well.
For sure. For sure. Got a lot of great information to share. And I thank you so much for joining me on my podcast, CX Unplugged, by the Multifamily Media Network today. Welcome to the network. So happy to have you. And I know the listeners are going to be super excited to see some great content coming out from you soon.
Thank you so much. And you're going to be on my show as well. So I'm looking forward to that.
Looking forward to it. We'll see you then. Thanks, everyone, for joining me on this episode of CX Unplugged by the Multifamily Media Network. I hope you'll join us next time. Take care.
CX Unplugged, where we have redefined who your customer really is. Join me next time to hear more missteps and masterful manifestations in the world of multifamily customer experience. Brought to you by the Multifamily Media Network.